and welcome to the Transition CrossRoads podcast. It's another session where we get to talk about the multidimensionality and the nitty-gritties of Africa's energy transition. And on today's episode, we are exploring a very interesting topic that we've crafted: electrifying African transport, lessons from Ghana's electric vehicle experience. And speaking to the conversation today is someone that is really at the forefront of this space. She's done quite a lot with as regards EV adoption in Africa, and she's Doris Edem Agbevivi. Just to give you a little bio about her pedigree, so you know that definitely she has the wherewithal and the expertise to speak to this conversation. Doris is an energy analyst and a Yale Climate Fellow with nearly a decade of experience advancing clean energy and sustainable development across Ghana and also internationally. Our expertise spans sustainable energy, transport systems, energy efficiency, emerging technologies, policy and regulation, and also low carbon development for emerging economies. Over the past 8 years, she has actually worked with the Energy Commission of Ghana, engaging key stakeholders and supporting national policy making, where she did a very interesting work that I'm really interested in. Is the Ghana's Drive Electric initiative that is under the Energy Commission. In this role, she was really instrumental in steering the country's e-mobility transition, interestingly again, organizing Ghana's first e-mobility conference and public charging forum that resulted in the first EV baseline study and developing standards for EV charging and battery swaps in Ghana. She also serves as the steering committee for Ghana's EV policy and collaborates with International Energy Agency to promote energy efficiency in transport across Africa. She's definitely passionate about sustainable energy, and she's also representing Ghana in global platforms like the COP, the ECOWAS Sustainable Energy Forum, the World Bank's Sum for All, and UK's Zero Emission Vehicles platform. So definitely, you already know that she has that experience. And also on the technical part, she's not lacking. She holds an MSc in Energy Economics from the University of Aberdeen, and also an MSc in Sustainability, Enterprise and Environment from the University of Oxford. So I find it really interesting reading this bio, because it's already obvious that the conversation we're going to have is going to be deep, it's going to be exciting, and it's going to synthesize very important and critical information. So Doris, thank you for joining us, and I'm really, really excited to have you on this podcast.
Thank you for having me, Emmanuel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So quickly, we'll just deep dive into the conversation. But before we start, particularly, and I believe quite a lot of persons will be interested in the work you did with Ghana's Drive Electric initiative. So I want you to speak to it. What was the purpose? What was achieved and its impact? Then, in addition to this also, how this has paved the way for broader EV adoption in Ghana. Then how this work you've done with this Drive Electric initiative can offer certain insights to the general, very ambitious Africa's energy transition.
Thank you for the question. And I think the Drive Electric initiative sits at the center of most of the conversation when it comes to electrification of transport systems, but also when it comes to conversations around decarbonization across the continent and for countries, right? Most countries have their energy transition plans, their decarbonization plans, and somehow in the midst of it, you will see the conversations around what the transition is going to look like, how they want to move, and where they want to move towards. And one of those is where we talk about transport electrification. It wasn't really the time I started the Drive Electric initiative at the Energy Commission. It was in 2019. We launched it in September 2019. We came to do the whole salt cutting in October 2019 at the Renewable Energy Fair, I remember, and being so passionate about it and not having any conversations of that across the country as at that time. Today, 6 years down the line, is different. When I'm driving Ghana and I see electric buses gliding on the road, and I see two-wheelers doing deliveries, electric two-wheelers, and I see people driving Teslas on the road, and I'm like, this is magnificent, basically. Yeah. And I see charging stations across the streets, and I'm like, from my house, there's a charging station on my apartment across the street, and I'm like, I look at it with a bit of excitement, looking back at it, because in 2019 there were barely that many electric vehicles. All of these companies that you see in Ghana today, you can go look up all of them, from Wahoo to Charge Express to all of them. They all came up in the conversations in the coming years afterwards. So it tells you that the starting of the Drive Electric initiative was key in pushing this agenda and the broad conversation of EV adoption forward. I like to quote one of the CEOs who has given me permission to quote him. I recently did a 3-month study. As part of my work in Oxford, I try to, again, when you're passionate about something, you want to always bring it back into the conversation. So I try to do a study on sustainability, but clearly on sustainability in Ghana's e-mobility sector. And that would be a conversation for another day, because that brought about deep tensions that you find in the system when it comes to what we regard as e-mobility, what the private sector players even regard that what they're doing, is it a sustainable thing? Where does it fit in the carbon transition and all? And that actually, and a talk I have to go and do in Houston, because I think a professor read a part of the work and goes like, I need this presented to us, because this is talking about a very tensious environment where you see, now let's understand, these are tensions. Now tensions are productive. They're supposed to exist to give us an outcome at the end of the day that is what we desire. But tensions are necessary because they bring out the best in the market when there are tensions. But when you do study the tensions and you see how it plays out, then you are able to, let's say, use the energy from those tensions to create what needs to be created. So when I say tensions, I'm talking of tensions in finance, and I'm talking of infrastructural tensions. I'm talking about even the conceptual tensions of what people know when they're doing mobility, right? But today I'm able to do that study because there are people in the market. Without participants in the market, I wouldn't have been able to do the study. Now, without the Drive Electric initiative and all the awareness that was created on it, we wouldn't have had people even entering the market. One of the CEOs, and I quote, said, Doris, when you started your Drive Electric initiative, do you know that I took that your concept notes and took it to some investors and told them that Ghana has started something in that. He said, I took just the concept note just to be able to get investor participation, because it made me aware that the investor community could see that Ghana as a country had come up to. So it wasn't just something that I would say I did, and I thought it was just something to create awareness, to bring people to play and all of that, but it was something that changed the face of conversations for both the private sector and the public sector. When the Drive Electric initiative started in 2019, I started with a concept note. I remember the first thing I wanted to do Drive Electric campaign. And then I was like, no, campaign, it would just look like a short-term campaign. And my then executive secretary at the Energy Commission, Dr. Fosu Ahinkra, who I credit with this because he indulged me. Somebody needs to indulge people who are energetic and passionate like myself, for us to get the footing to be doing what we do, because some of the times half of the things we start don't succeed, and some of the initiatives we build don't. So somebody has to give you that ground to build on. And he was very indulgent, basically, because I had linked the whole initiative to Ghana's energy challenges. At that time, we had this huge oversupply capacity, but we also had the thing about the conundrum of creating more demand in the system. And you wanted to create demand not just for industry, residential, and all. You wanted demand beyond that. How else could we create demand, organic demand within the economic system of the country that came through transportation? It could also use electricity. So blending the two, the fact that we're solving a challenge, but also in that creation of a solution, we're creating something that will take us forward into our energy transition, our decarbonization plan. It became that idea that I could sell to people, because you need to sell the idea that works to people. And that was how I birthed this whole thing, and then change the name to an initiative instead of a campaign. And happy I did that. Today it's still called the Drive Electric Initiative. But since 2019 up till today, 2025, I was at the IEA conference just last week. IEA had the energy efficiency conference in Ghana here, and I remember I did 2 presentations on Monday and Wednesday to the transport section, and I did a presentation with one of the CEOs of one of these companies, Solar Taxi George, and we have this because I've known George since, because George was one of the few people who were in the market Solar Taxi before I started the Drive Electric initiative, and George says it clearly that I use your Drive Electric initiative to get investor confidence because that's the needed government. You see, private sector needs strategic direction from government. With that, you are able to have the two working together. Private sector can do it on their own, but with government, they can go further.
Yeah.
Private sector requires funding, but sometimes they require the incentives and the creative environment to be able to thrive, right? Somebody needs to give them that environment. And so when they see things like policy frameworks that can be able to attract investment, they launch on it with everything. And that's how come we're able to talk about this. But the room being filled with over 50 people just to do energy efficiency training, I was like, this is Ghana. Basically, transport has taken its own turn and is going its own direction in ways that we couldn't have stopped it.
Yeah.
The reason why that is happening is organically, there is a need for transport electrification. And everybody has seen how when you come to NDCs and when you come to emissions, the top 3 emissions, we are talking transport, energy, and others, right? But these two, if you interact with these two, the way that an electric vehicle interacts with these two, we are benefiting by reducing this and reducing that. And we even get a bigger bonus and bigger benefit if the energy we are using is cleaner and green. So that was why this went far. But in addition, there were initiatives that people could rally behind. When there is an initiative, it's like somebody holding a torchlight for others to kind of follow. And that was basically what I did. Just hold a torchlight and have others follow. Now, when you hold the torchlight, you need to know when to be able to leave the torch. When people have already lighted their own torches, you can leave the torch. And you leave the torch and you'll be grateful because there are people who have lit their light from you will now be able to stand on their own feet. I like to refer to it. There's a book that a professor wrote in Houston, Ghana's energy sector, and somehow dedicated a chapter of it to me, about 70 pages. I don't know how she got so many words, 70 pages worth of stuff to say about me, but I think she likened it to one participant, one theory they had where when somebody that at some point when the market is ready and ripe, the person can exit the market and the market will still thrive. That was my dream. That was my goal for Drive Electric Initiative, a point where you catalyze the whole industry to start moving. You catalyze government, you catalyze private sector, you catalyze development partners, and they all come and rally behind you. Then in their quest and their rally behind you, they also start creating their own thing. And at that point, you're good to go. That was the deal. I targeted 4 things. Awareness creation, top of my list, because what people don't know, they don't even
engage
rally
with.
behind. They can't engage. Why? And whether they know it negatively or positively, it's not a problem. We need engagement. Then there was the second one, which was policy. Then there was the third one, which was standardization and regulation. And then there was the fourth one, which was the incentives to incentivize the market. So these were my 4 targets. And I could say at the time where I was exiting from that role, I had achieved it all. Under the awareness creation was the first e-mobility conference. It's still on YouTube. It was done in September 2021, so you can just go for it. It's still on YouTube from the Energy Commission website. And I put together the first public charging forum to bring public charging people together. I brought all the people I had in my network from the IEA, from Dundee City Council, because I studied the Dundee's people and how they had done mobility and driven it in that council. People from ZEV in the UK. Really, I brought people in. Fastned, the biggest charging station across Europe that you see mostly in the Netherlands, in the UK and others. Fastned was present. We had the charging wall box is called wall box, but because they put it on the wall and on the box, basically that's the name. But that charging across Europe, I brought all these players together with the Ghanaian players to sit in a room and talk. We were talking policy, we were talking technology, we were talking business. For me, that were the biggest holds of awareness, both for the public and for those who would drive the industry in charging. There was a policy which you needed to push, but the policy, the mandate needed to be for somebody else. It was the Ministry of Transport. But all I could do was to catalyze them to do what they had to do. There's a way to catalyze people to do. When people want to do something, and sometimes you take the role, they want to come and take their role from you. Why are you taking my role, right? And that's equally positive work because you've catalyzed them to do the work. And in that case, I went to sit on the steering committee and ensure that the policy was rolled out finally. And if you read that policy document on several pages, it references the baseline studies. Now, the baseline study was one of the profound things I did under the Drive Electric initiative because it took me almost a year and a half going across the country, talking to people, getting players involved, and doing that study. So the baseline study was comprehensive, and even up to today, charging station players tell me they go and refer to that baseline study because I got information from everywhere. The insurance holders, the people who were on their bikes in the northern part of Ghana, trying to find out whether they will use an electric bike. You have to get into the minds of a lot of people, not just an Accra phenomenon. Basically, it has to be more. And so that was one of the key documents that became a hold on a lot of things, and people used it a lot. And it was referenced in the policy documents, which you would find on the website and the Ministry of Energy website. So that calculated my work when it came to policy and awareness. Then there was the standardization, right? So now you were going to have to standardize the EV charging framework. You want to standardize the charging equipment that we are bringing to make sure that it's up to IEC standards, the International Electrotechnical Committee standards, and also the vehicles too, because we need to standardize these vehicles, 2 and 3 wheelers. Both those that are assembled within the country needs to be standardized so that when they're going through homologation, they are able to meet a certain standard. Also, the used vehicles that come into the country we needed to have a standard to say, okay, we needed a battery state of health, maybe 80% or 70% as a country. So at the port, you're bringing your battery report to be able to specify what cars are coming in before. So all of these standardization processes had to take place, and that was done for the charging infrastructure. It took us about 5 months to get that done, and then I went trying to work with donors at this point. Then I got donor support from the AFD, who I work with now at the Agence Française Développement, but they funded the regulations. So after you get standards and you have adapted standards on their own, they don't move a market. The reason is because they don't have the implementing power. People can choose to follow a standard, but standards are not binding. So you need a regulation to be able to hold the standards for the people to get to the market. And that was what drove us to be able to get the regulations drafted with donor support, of course, to be able to do that. Then came the incentives that required me writing a policy proposal somewhere in March 2020. I remember that, March 2021, if I'm specific. And then that was taken through to the Ministry of Finance. There were several meetings had on it. That incentive was announced somewhere in 2024. And I was telling somebody that if you knew the journey it took, but I think these processes were both challenging, but thrilling, very rewarding. I would say it any day, anyhow. It took a lot, but it was thrilling because at the end of the day, I remember somebody referring to me as the sun of the EV market, like the sun shining for the EV market, really. And I get where they were coming from with that perspective because everybody that needed to get into the market was at some point calling me. The person who came to the port who couldn't clear their car is calling you because they feel you can do magic. The person who goes to a charging station that cannot charge their vehicle, they are calling you because they feel you can do magic, right? So it became that. But I think what I'm happy about is that the industry can move with or without me, and I can still have the influence I have on the industry and still be able to push them in the various subtle ways I would do by engaging with and without them. So these were the chunk of it. But these 4 pillars are not the only. There were so many things. I didn't mention the baseline study, but it was a pillar that fed the policy, because that was what catalyzed the policy framework that we had on EVs, right? There's so many others. Today, before I left, I had started a study on the market study for charging infrastructure to be able to give people a business case. And that was with support of the UNDP, to be able to do that. And of course, I wouldn't let our GIs there, because I took their money to start a charging station, what I call a demonstrative charging station, a solar charging station at the premises of the Energy Commission, which was inaugurated after I'd left, but of course started by me. The point is that you've got to understand that what you start will live for you. It will live without you, but it will live regardless. That's where we have to be going, right? To start the initiatives, draw the space, cause the catalyst, cause havoc, however way it is, but make sure that it be able to bring change. One of the biggest ways when I did awareness creation was I became a mobile billboard. I say this in a very funny way, because I would drive electric vehicles in this country, and I will insist that the cars that people bring to me to drive, they have to write something on it. This car is electric. This is this. Electric is the future. Some of these things, right? And I think I've been driving electric cars in Ghana since 2021. And the thing about it is it was supposed to provoke. It was supposed to provoke a reaction. People say there's no bad PR, right? There's no good or bad PR. It's about what you do with it. I needed to provoke conversation. As much as people saw me in these cars, and some would say, wow, she's driving an electric car. There were those that just insulted me for the fun of it. Like, I mean, real insult, right? What sort of stupid thing is this you're doing? You don't have electricity. Who's going to charge it? Like, people say things that they want to say. But there are times I will park at the supermarket. I say this story a lot, where I came out and my car was surrounded with lots of people. I couldn't get to my own car. Now, what surprised me at the end of the day, when I came and I raised my hand and said, it's my car, I'm opening the door, was somebody was under the car, like literally under the car, because they were trying to verify whether truly the car didn't have an exhaust film. You see, because it's a fully electric vehicle, it's not supposed to have an exhaust film, so the tailpipe is not there, right? So that's what they are verifying, and it tells you about the curiosity of the market, people wanting to know. So awareness was key. Today, people do electric vehicle conferences all over the country. I'm not involved in it again, but just doing one was enough to stir people to decide. I mean, everybody has a motive. They may want to make profit of it or something, but still, regardless, it's being done. Awareness is being created, right? And that is where we come in today, because we have incentivized the market, we have a standardization process, there is the automotive policy, all of these things in place. You get assembly people in the market, although it's still a young market. But this is what we talk about, laying the groundwork for a transition.
Yeah, this is really revolutionary, if I'm allowed to use the word. It's I think it's really important, especially the fact that you talked about it catalyzing the process, because within the sector you get to find people having opposing views, but the most important thing is let's catalyze it and see how it drives forward. And with what you did with the Ghana Drive Electric Initiative is really robust. A lot of work has been done there, but I'd want us to drill down into the policy aspect of it, because you mentioned that the baseline study informed the policy measures. I'm asking this question because I'm looking at a case where the policies that have been adopted in Ghana's electric vehicle space can serve as a form of like a roadmap of some sort that can be adopted by other countries across Africa, depending on, definitely each country have their own specific nitty-gritties that are different. But considering what Ghana has done, can you drill down a little bit into the policy measures that were done that were instrumental to the uptake of EV in Ghana that other countries across the continent can adopt?
So I think for Ghana, I wouldn't say only that the policy has been the driving force, mainly because the policy was only adopted in 2023 and probably started pushing stuff in 2024. I would say, I always say the things I would credit for the deeper adoption and what we're seeing in Ghana is the private sector's ingenuity, the private sector's drive for innovation. I go into rooms and before I talk to the private sector, I ask people to clap for the private sector. Not because it's because I understand, having run a business, having understood what it means to be both private and having worked in government and understood both sides, I know the pain of a private sector player. But for private sector players who work in markets where there is no regulation or policy, but still drive through, they are the real MVPs for me because they are the people who innovate through the storm.
Yeah.
When
Sure.
there's a storm and you're still thinking of innovation, you really desire the innovation. And so I want to say, I will applaud the private sector players, those who came in even without a standard. In the charging station sector, for instance, there's been one like Ijanu, who, when it came to Ghana, at that time, we didn't even have the standards for charging stations. We didn't even have the draft regulations that we have today for charging stations. But regardless, it came into the market. Guys like Solar Taxi, who have been in the market for so long, at that time, there was literally, I hadn't even started Drive Electric Initiative. If I remember the numbers he gave me, they started the whole thing around solar taxi in 2018, just a year before. Maybe they were still in the beginning stages, fine. But to even decide you want to start without any policy, it takes a lot of energy to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of resilience to stay in the market for this long. And also, I think the main thing that has driven the market has been the private sector and their drive for innovation that has pushed the market with or without regulations or policy.
Yeah.
But I think we have to also then give the credit to players like myself, innovation, initiatives, policies that come in. Because even when the private sector comes in with innovation into the market, at some point, when they receive clarity, it gives them comfort to plan the future, to go further and to go deeper. And that is where I say it has been two of these things, the ingenuity, the innovation of the private sector, but also with the policy. Now, the policy, when it came in, has clearly defined some terms. That before the policy was the energy transition framework for Ghana, where it clearly states by 2040, for instance, there should be no ICE vehicle. In ICE, I mean internal combustion engine vehicles, that we need to be able to abolish that. Now, it's be able to state that gives both a private person and those that want to do initiatives a policy direction, strategic policy direction to work towards. And that became what would also want to maybe bring in more people or otherwise. The EV policy, the 2023 EV policy from the Ministry of Transport that was done, gave clear phases for EV adoption. There was a phase 1, there was a phase 2, and there is the phase 3. The phase 1 is going up to 2026, and it's more like the preparatory phase because they appreciate the fact that even though there are players in the market, there is still a lot that needs to be done in terms of policy. And so that means that do a lot of preparatory phase, get the market on the ground, put what needs to be put here. Everybody came in doing innovation, so everybody's doing what will benefit them. But you as the government needs to now put things in place, and that was the preparatory phase. Then there is the next phase that goes into 2035, and I like to call this phase the 35 by 35. So it's asking for 35% penetration by 2035. Now, that penetration, with that concept in mind, private sector players know this is where Ghana wants to be. So if I'm coming in, this is where I want to be able to. So yes, the policy has come to give a certain strategic direction from a country perspective wide, and that is needed. But I think what I've seen on the African continent, for my colleagues in Kenya who I have worked closely with, try to work on some battery what's it called, end of life battery policy documents with the UNEP in Nairobi, and that of course brought a lot of Kenyan players. And even during the 2024 IE Energy Efficiency Week in Kenya, I had the pleasure of working closely with my Kenyan colleagues to understood what they did. At that time, they still even didn't have the EV policy. The Kenyan EV policy came later on in 2024. But before 2024, you heard of things like companies like M-Kopa.
Yeah.
You heard of so many of these people
Yeah,
already. You heard of Basigo. You heard of all this on the road. Okay, so it tells you that the private sector takes lead to policy. It's always gone ahead of regulations. Always gone ahead of policy because they are daring and they want to go as far. But I think it will be the case that we may see more of this. But I hope that the lessons from Ghana and Kenya, for instance, would be able to drive others to put policy first. Sometimes we are not necessarily able to do that because the most of the entire African continent depends a lot on importation of vehicles.
Yeah.
And when they import used vehicles or new vehicles, whichever way it is, once these vehicles change abroad, they tend to be the stock that we import. So today, if somebody wanted to import a RAV4, basically maybe from, let's say, 2020 or 2024 model, it's a plug-in hybrid or it's a hybrid. So whatever they're importing it based on what is available on that market to bring here.
Yeah.
So without even doing much, that is how electric vehicles seep onto our continent, right? So some of the time, there are countries that, even though there's no private sector play, there are individuals that have EVs on the market already. So there will always be that case because of how our sort of demand for vehicles, how the arrows move, it's Europe to here. It becomes a case where private players, individuals will always go ahead of the policy. But I don't think it should deter policymakers to still come and clean the market, have a preparatory phase, put in the standards, and engage the private sector players, especially those who have already taken the lead. They are even the most important to engage because by engaging them, they get to be involved in the policy and the standards. Then they get to change their own equipment or what they are using with what is being talked about. You don't finish it and then go and tell them, I'm shutting your shop. You didn't meet standard or you didn't do this. No. They took the risks on the market when there was no standard. So there's a way to be able to bring them back into the fold. And that's how I see the African market going to look. Products, individuals, private sector will always take the lead to the market, but it shouldn't deter the government and players to be able to come up with policy and other regulatory framework to be able to push the market. It will be that.
Yeah, I do agree because obviously the private sector definitely has an overwhelming role to play in this case. And it actually leads to my second question. If we're to see EV adoption across Africa, as you've already also mentioned in the Ghanaian case, it means that the private sectors actually have to be at the forefront to drive investments in the availability of EVs, while the government also definitely supports. But then again, you also agree that upscaling charging infrastructure across the continent has met its own fair share of challenges. If we're to see significant EV adoption across the continent, we are supposed to also definitely see a huge investment in availability of charging infrastructures. Definitely that we address charging anxiety, because one thing with these EVs is people will be like, if my battery runs out on the road, can I just easily get an access to a charging infrastructure? So in the Ghanaian case, for instance, what have been the challenges limiting the availability of charging infrastructures, possibly also looking at it from a private sector perspective? And also, what are the opportunities? Then there's another part of it where EV adoption currently across the African continent tends to be focused mainly in urban cities. Like, for instance, I think that was also the case with Ghana. In Nigeria also, you tend to see a lot of EV charging infrastructures in Lagos, in Abuja. Then the other, not too urban or rural areas, it's really, the availability is really, really limited. So the question I'm asking is, also looking at it from both the lens of the urban and the rural areas, the dichotomy there, what do you think the challenges and the opportunities are currently? You can also look at it from the Ghanaian perspective, but looking at it from a better eye view on the African continent, what do you think are the challenges and the opportunities as it stands right now?
I mean, my portfolio here at the Agence Française de Développement is on energy transition and green infrastructure. I think what that portfolio means is it goes a bit bigger than normal in terms of when you talk of green infrastructure, charging infrastructure fits into green infrastructure and so many other green infrastructures. So when I'm zooming in from that lens in the green infrastructure across the continent and zooming in with the lens of charging infrastructure framework, I see it as the way one would see carbon finance as a challenge at the same time as an opportunity, right? The reason why I see charging stations and the whole green infrastructure as a challenge and as an opportunity is mainly because of what it would take for entry into that market. That's the challenge. And most of it, who the people that are going to drive charging infrastructure would be the private sector. I don't talk a lot about government, but I push it as it has to be public-private partnership if government has to be involved. I don't want to push the conversation where we have government only running charging stations because the tendency across the continent is our maintenance attitudes are not really par. When something is for a private sector player, they will make sure it's working day and night because that's where their daily bread is coming from. But we see this very interesting attitude towards work or attitude towards this. If it were government, it's for nobody. It's a public good. That's how we see it. Even though it's money that is used to do it, we still think public good. Let's just use it as we want to use it, right? Clear example, if you have a pipe of water out there, you say it's free for everybody. My dear, even the person who has tap in their house will come and fetch that water because you told them it was free for everybody. They'll fetch it until it's finished. And even if the handle of the tap broke, they will find a way to squeeze it out. Nobody will fix the handle. Why? Because it's the idea that it's public good. That is the only challenge when it comes to charging stations across the continent if it is pushed by government. The government attitude across our African continent, it's not just a Ghanaian, Nigerian issue. It's every African country. It's an issue running across. We don't run it like it's a business, right? If it's state-owned agencies, we don't run them like business. So in that case, who is going to make sure that the charging station is working? No. You have to get another institution to be going to ensure that implementation and enforcement. That is just throwing away money. But if you say the private sector, go into that business, we will support you. We will create an enabling environment for you. They will make sure the charging stations are there, available and working. Now, on the African continent, I hear a lot of people, and I also believe that a lot of us are going to do charging from our homes for private players, because I think what people don't understand, and I remember saying this at a conference more recent when somebody was asking questions like, when you are in traffic, does the battery run out and all of this? And I'm like, okay. So one of the things I did was I would drive the electric vehicles to places and do things with it that you cannot think of. I drove my electric vehicle to 5% battery, 4% battery specific. Now, you don't get to do that. You have to do that with a very scared face on. But if I don't do it, how will I understand the vehicle? I needed to see how the vehicle was going to respond to me. At a certain level of battery, very low, below 10%, when it got to, I think, was it 7 or 8? I don't remember the exact number, but it turned off the AC automatically. Because here's an electric vehicle, it's trying to conserve energy. At some point, my radio went off. I think at 4% exactly, my radio went off. Everything was conserved to the car to get you to where you were going. And if it can't, then it gives up. So it's doing its best to get you there. But most people don't know this. They assume that the car, but you will know that the car is taking you somewhere. You will know what is left on it, this whole thing. I drove instead in one traffic for 2 hours. My battery didn't go run down, because I had no AC running. If I even had AC, I don't think it would have run that. But the batteries, it's not, number one, aside the fact that it's regenerative on the road, when you are moving, it
Yeah.
finds a way of charging itself. You know very well that when you're not using the battery, it's like a battery, it's like your phone. When you're not using it and you're not exerting on it, it doesn't. So there is that concept that most people are going to charge from their homes, but that is for the private players. Africa is going to have a lot of buses that are going to be electric buses. And for us, we know that public transportation for us forms a huge part of our transportation in Africa.
Yeah.
So what is going to drive the change will be public transportation on the African continent. What is going to drive the emissions per person to be high is public transportation. But for public transportations, you cannot charge it from home. And that's where the difference is for our continent specific issues. So we need charging stations, and we need charging stations that are reliable, that are available, that are well resourced. And so to have such, you need to be able to engage the private sector. So the charging stations as green infrastructure needs to be pushed through the private sector. And in doing that, you need to be able to make sure that you create a conducive environment to allow the private sector to thrive. Another key thing we have on the African continent, aside the public transportation, everybody has a different name for it. It's either a matatu or trotro. Everybody has a name for it, we know, but it's public transportation regardless. So the ability to even probably retrofit public transportation, the continent, is one of the key things that may change a lot of conversation. But retrofitting has its own challenges. It comes with its own cost element, but it comes with its own imbalance issue. You're looking at the density of these engines, swapping it for a battery. All of these conversations are there. But nonetheless, if we had electric buses on the road, one thing is clear that it will require charging stations, DC charging stations, fast charging stations, and that will require an investment that is huge enough to be able to build. And that is the challenge, the investment challenge for green infrastructure. The investment challenge for green infrastructure is mostly felt by the private sector because they're the ones that are going through it. Now, the only way to be able to bring the partnership of private and government, the public-private partnership, could be government necessarily just coming up with regulations to make it conducive, but additionally, coming up with incentives to incentivize that market. If the private sector player is going to bring a charging station down and it's going to cost him maybe roughly $100,000, and you just say that when you bring and you want to set up in a certain area, I'll make sure you've got transformers, you've got everything that needs to be able to, in that, that is government's own support towards that. Although that is not, that can just be maybe $10,000 worth of it or $5,000 worth of it. Funny enough, it drives people to come into the sector. It looks very small, but just that, or telling them that when you get to the port, you can be able to, you will not pay any customs duty for your charging equipment.
Like fiscal incentives.
It's just easy, basically. These are some of the things that we're saying will cause the shift, because the challenge is the investment, but that is also the opportunity to have government partnering with the private sector to be able to make this work. Because if government were to have bus programs, I heard Nigeria, one of the people from Nigeria was telling me about this initiative that the Nigerian government has started on doing buses on the campuses, university campuses. And I mean, so something like that, really. If government is supposed to say, I'm buying every campus 10 electric buses to run, it means that those campuses need to have at least a few public charging, maybe even with 10 buses, you can do it 3. I mean, schedule their charging in such a way, or 2 even, schedule their charging in such a way that everybody is able to get the charge as in this time and all. But that investment is huge because DC fast chargers are expensive. They require a lot more investment, right? So in that case, if government even provide the market for them, which is the demand, because most people will want to come in when there is critical demand. Without critical demand, a private sector player doesn't want to just bring their money into a market. They want a critical demand that should drive that market. That's where we're coming in, right? And that's where I believe that although it's a challenge, it's equally an opportunity for government to come in and to be able to make sure that these people are able to drive green infrastructure. Investment is the biggest challenge for green infrastructure across the continent, and especially for charging stations. But it also is an opportunity for innovative mechanisms to address the investment challenge. And that is one of the things I believe public-private partnership can be able to drive.
Yeah, I agree, because within the context of investments, it's really important that if this if the investment factor of charging infrastructures is not addressed, like you mentioned, its large scale adoption is going to continuously face drawbacks. And this somehow ties me to the next question. Is the question of the cost of EVs across Africa. It's like the big elephant in the room. EVs are not cheap, especially for passengers vehicles. I saw there's an EV that was released recently by, I think, Hawaii or Xiaomi rather. I think though it's quite cheap within that context, is about, I think, about $15,000, $16,000. But that's really on the cheap end. The typical Model 3, let's say typical Model 3 Tesla car would go for like 25 or 30K. Within the African context, it's really expensive. I saw a report recently by the Christensen Institute where they were arguing that about 95% of Africans earn less than $3,500 per annum. So the purchasing parity is really limited. But considering the work you've done in Ghana, that has, to a certain extent, catalyzed the purchase of EVs in Ghana, what do you think has happened that has made EVs affordable? Not now, affordable now is in quotes, right? When I mean affordable, is I'm talking about what has made EVs, what makes the cost of EVs attractive, that the public is willing to give up their scarce resources to get it. That's one. Then also, within the context of using electric vehicles for public transport, like you said, the keke napes, the matatus, and all that. Also, the persons that are going to buy these public transport, these EVs for public uses, like the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers, these persons also have challenges in trying to get their purchasing parity significantly limited. So in the case of Ghana, for instance, what has happened that has made it attractive for these people to get it?
I don't think they can all get it, but I have a counter question for you. Why do you think you can only get a Tesla before you have an EV? Because you guys keep using Tesla prices, and I keep asking, why do you all feel you should be able to get a Tesla before you have an EV?
Yeah, so responding to that, and that question is interesting. The reason I made an example of Tesla is a popular brand. Of course, there are cheaper EVs from China, for instance, that have actually, for instance, taken over, for instance, European markets. I was recent, like for instance, I'm currently based in Germany. If you're in Germany, I think you see more of non-Tesla EVs than Tesla EVs in Europe right now. Right, but the Tesla is just the go-to. Once you say EVs, one of the first things that comes to mind is, for instance, the Tesla car. But I also understand that
you Africans have this interesting drive for big cars,
true,
big engines, loud cars, car that can shout when you get into a place. Right, the car itself should shout before you get inside because you want the car to be wow, right? Really, but even in that conversation, there are a lot of Chinese vehicles that are challenging the Tesla designs.
Mm-hmm.
The car I used in Ghana mostly was the Aura Good Cat EV. The Aura Good Cat is one of the EVs by the Great Wall China company. Great Wall has cars like the Aura Black Cat and the rest. The Aura Good Cat, if you see it on me, it was a white one I used. It was this sleek, small but very heavy car that when you see the front, you think I was driving a Porsche because the lights and everything, the design on there. When you enter the car, you see my dashboard, you think I'm in a Tesla. When you see the AC belts and everything, you think I'm in a Mercedes. And I know this because I'm a car fanatic, so I've kind of picked a few. The thing is that what they modeled, you cannot say exactly is this or that, but it's modeled to give you that feel. And trust me, that car was heavy because the weight of the car was on the body of the car. Now, EVs, if the battery is not that heavy, you need to make the car itself heavy. So the weight of the car is on the body when you open, people come and sit and try to open the door, and they think they're opening normal door only to realize that, or maybe they want to close it and then they realize that, wow, this is heavier than usual. That Aura Black car, I love the car so much because it's a 60 kilowatt battery and 500 kilometer range. So when I was using it, I could charge twice in a month. And that for me was the life, because I would drive it anywhere and not worry about. And when I want to charge, I'll just schedule it Friday nights or something. I charge all through till the next couple of days because I charge at home. It came with its charger because most of the EVs come with level 1 charging opportunity, really. So that's why I say that a lot of people would opt for home charging. But of course, when you're in a hurry, you want to be able to go for DC fast charger. But even with that, there's a disadvantage of it. Too much of DC charging also has an implication on the batteries, basically. So it's a balance of the two, especially when it's your personal vehicle. But that car was coming at about $30,000. That car had a 500 kilometer range. That car had a 60 kilowatt battery. That car, in 1 year, I hadn't gone anywhere to do anything to the car. And in 1 year, I hadn't even spent what I spend monthly in my CRV for fuel in 1 year. I hadn't even spent up to my monthly. I hadn't still hit the monthly. That tells you something. The savings was enormous. And in that context of savings, if my 1 year expenditure for fuel, if my 1 year expenditure for charging, right, is up to 1 month expenditure for fuel, that means I've saved 12 times, because all the other months, basically, if I'm spending 100 Ghana cedi per month in mine, then the whole year now I'm spending 100 Ghana cedi. That means on the other one, I should have spent 12,000. Now I'm spending 100 Ghana cedi. That is really, that tells you, 1,200. Now you're spending 100. So it tells you that it's 12 times you, like, what you're saving tells you it's that enormous. And that is where the conversation should go to. But I also drove the Aura Black Cat. That was 8,000. So you see, it's about your taste and your preferences. The Aura Black Cat was $8,000. And it had 51 kilometer range, if I remember, 350. The battery capacity, I think, was, forgotten the battery capacity, but that was 351 kilometer range. And again, another one that I enjoyed so much. It was smaller, a bit smaller than the Aura Good Car, but again, it was so enjoyable. It was good on the road. It was cost efficient. It was so many things and more. But you could equally say you want to go for the BYD tank. The BYD tank, if you see it, that car is the luxury. It's a 7-seater car, 700 kilometer range. And now I think they've even bettered it up. I got 2 people in Ghana that use a BYD tank, I know. And that car is at par with Tesla Model Y, basically. Of course, it doesn't open this way up like a Tesla would do, fine. But when I say at par, I'm talking of the interior, I'm talking of the technical abilities of the car, I'm talking of the range, I'm talking of things that make it a par. So again, our interest, our preferences is what is causing us to see the cost of EVs that way. Also, because what is available so much in the loud form on the internet is always a Tesla. Or it's always all of these vehicles that we talk about. But there are lots of vehicles. There's a Nissan Leaf, if you don't want to do Chinese. There's a Nissan Leaf, there's a Golf, there's the e-Golf. Literally, there's the Hyundai Kona, right? There are all these vehicles that literally are good and at par. So I'm not going to say, oh, don't buy an $80,000 Tesla. Go buy maybe a $30,000 Leaf or $20,000 Leaf. I'm not saying do this, but I'm saying that look at it and see the benefit, because regardless, they are both going to give you benefit. But there's a reason why somebody will not want to go buy a V8 just because it's burning full just like that. But there's a reason why somebody else will buy it, and come rain or shine, because They want the sound. They need to hear the sound. It gives them what they desire for the vehicle. But again, we have to, change comes with, life is all about change, the ability to go with the flow as life is changing. Like a lot of countries now are not even going for these big vehicles anymore, right? Because even the space for you to park in some places are not even available for those big vehicles, right? But then some still have it. So nobody's saying don't stop or don't go by. But we think we need to rethink what becomes our criteria for buying vehicles, what becomes the preferences, and what becomes the interest. But again, what would change the whole dynamics is when we start assembling vehicles within the context of a country.
Yeah.
And that is where the change has been. Again, for countries like Ghana, we've had the assembly of normal ICE vehicles in the country. And of course, those still are expensive for some people in terms of new vehicles. But it could just be that Africans have an interesting preference for used vehicles. I remember the UNEP was doing this presentation to me somewhere and quoted about 50% of the vehicles on the continent that were used over, basically. And it tells you that we just have this interesting preference for used vehicles. But how do we balance that? There's a conundrum. Balancing that conversation around used vehicles and knowing very well that we need to also look at our emissions and some of the age of these vehicles, right? And the standards of these vehicles and how they come in. So it's a whole blend. We need to rethink our preferences. We need to open our mind to change and the fact that those whole idea of I'm never buying a Chinese vehicle. See, people have literally bought a lot of them and the prices are affordable for them, right? But again, why not a Tesla if you have the money? But I think if we keep saying that because it's too expensive, we are not buying it, we don't even get to go and research to know what it is we are dealing with, what the amounts are, and where we're going in. But I believe that there's going to come that time where, because of assembling within town and here, the prices of EVs are going to come a bit more, and it will become a more conducive environment. But I think in addition to that will be the incentivization of customs duties or port taxes, really these other elements that add the burden to the buyer when after they've shipped the vehicle needed to now go for clearance and pay for all of these other elements of duties, right? If that incentive is also encouraged, it would drive the penetration faster. But again, Africa has to balance that with their own debt situations and it becomes that really. So if you notice Ghana, what the incentives were was for public buses, so electric buses, right? And then addition to electric buses, the incentives were for assembling of 2 and 3 wheelers, right? So that when you bring the parts, the SKD and CKD, that is it. But again, that even requires further steps before a company can be able to take advantage of those. But it's a broader conversation than just say it's too expensive. Yes, it is. So on the part of the individual, we have to work on our preferences and our tastes and how we want to do it. And on the part of government, we have to be able to decide, right, how we want to support the private sector to also come into the place where they will be able to afford that.
Yeah, so I totally really agree with you because, like you mentioned, there is this general perception that when you think EVs, you think Teslas, which is really not the case. And I think this also ties to the next question that I want to ask. It's also about perception. When you talk to the average person on the street, or when you mention when you mention EVs, what comes to mind usually is the passenger vehicles, where you have your like 4-seaters, as the case may be. But there is, in the African context, 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers are also beginning to play a very crucial role, especially in the rural area. So we haven't actually touched on that, but I would actually want you to touch on that very shortly. In the long run, considering that the whole essence of this transport electrification is to cut down on the emissions from the transport sector. Do you think that 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers in the rural areas will actually play a very critical role in trying to aim in trying to attain the aim of electrifying transport systems across the continent?
Absolutely, because it's what is going to drive the side. The thing about 2 and 3 wheelers is that the battery capacities of those are lower, and so it offers the opportunity to rethink what charging elements we want to use, whether we want to use swappable batteries or whether we want to use that. So with 2 and 3 wheelers, for a typical 2 wheeler, if you have probably you have 4 kilowatt battery, you can have two 2 kilowatt batteries. There's a company in Ghana here called Kofa, and Kofa does 2 wheeler bikes and also has battery swap stations. So these bikes get to the station, you remove your empty battery,
Swap.
take out a new one, put that in, and if the whole dynamics around battery swaps is integrated so well with solar, it also means that these batteries become in storage, I bet temporary storage for solar when you have it. And the whole thing around decentralizing these conversations on the rural areas, taking mini grid to the rural areas, solar, all of these standalone systems. In a way, when you are able to bring together the standalone systems in the villages in this way with the battery swap, right? What you are having is that you are having a village that can have its own standalone electricity system, but also could have a solar system that is based, that has battery, but also has swappable batteries, that the villagers can be able to take those batteries to be able to swap for their 2 and 3 wheelers. Now, not only do these people use the batteries just for their 2 and 3 wheelers, some of them use the batteries for other things, to light up their homes, to, so many things. So it's like a revolutionary element of looking at where we have seen rural areas and unreachable communities as the ones that will help us to attain universal access. These 2 and 3 wheeler conversations in rural areas will offer us a way to rethink the whole electrification on that part of the world, because in electrifying those parts of the world, you are able to bring their transport electrification and their standalone electrification systems together to communicate with each other and serve a community that otherwise would not have been served. A community that otherwise would probably not have had transport systems to use within, right? Some of these use these 2 wheelers to go to the hospital, to carry pregnant women to the hospital. What is more noble than that, carrying a pregnant woman to the hospital, and when they don't have that access, and ideally, right? But then most people would also use this as more economic points, right? Because in doing that, you offer these people jobs, right? It's able to be that person that starts a 2 wheeler business, right? Because now he can use 2 wheelers to be able to carry people from place to place, right? And all of this, it's a whole systematic thought. If you think about it in that systematic way, you'll be able to see how that can lift. And that is what I would call the leapfrogging. It leapfrogs people from a particular point to a place where they would ideally not have been, really. And that is very important, basically.
Yeah, definitely. That is really important. The inbreak of EVs into 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers into rural areas across Africa is of course is really, really important. Now, it brings me to the last question. That is going to be a little bit bulky, and is the question of collaboration and partnerships. You've already spoken about this before, about the public-private partnership, for instance, that happened in Ghana with the Ghana Drive Electric Initiative. But you also agree with me that across Africa, right, each country has its own peculiar governance frameworks, nitty-gritties, and everything. So definitely saying that the African continent itself will adopt a generic partnership or collaboration framework is a long shot that might not be possible. But considering what has been done in Ghana, what lessons do you think that other African countries can learn in terms of having this collaboration and this partnership come to fruition? Because I've also seen that quite, like for instance, in Ethiopia, a lot is also being done within the EV sector, and even EV upscaling is also happening. Also, I'm quite aware that quite a lot is being done in Nigeria. These are like I can use the word hotspots, right? But from these hotspots now looking at it from the lens of Ghana, what can other countries that are not at the forefront of this EV journey, what can they adopt? That's one. Then two, looking into the future, you sound really optimistic, and a quite of other experts within the field are really optimistic. But there are also some persons that are not as optimistic as you are, right? But looking into the future with the current technology in Africa, like you mentioned, assembling is also key. There are other parts of EVs, for instance, I'm in the battery space, and in terms of battery manufacture for EVs, Africa is significantly lacking behind. But looking into the future with these challenges and also with the opportunities you've mentioned, what do you think the future is going to look like for EV marketing for Africa? Because I saw a report recently from the International Energy Agency on the global EV Outlook 2025. And the sales of EV for Africa is really, really low. I don't think it's even up to 5 compared to the world, right? So while you're really optimistic about it, some antagonists could be like, no, that's not the case. But looking into the future, what do you think, given an expert opinion now, what do you think is going to look like a couple of years from now, the EV market in Africa? I know it's a lot of questions, but I just lump them together, right? I think you're muted now.
Sorry, it's fine totally. I have been working with the IEA for a while. I actually used to review the global EV outlook some years back, read all the 200-page document and put my reviews in it. And it's been a pleasure doing that. And so from that perspective, I can speak from the fact that I've been part of review teams in the GOV over the past years. The numbers we see represented in the GOV for Africa are not the numbers for Africa. Basically, it's not because the GOV is being mean towards Africa. No, it's because they don't have the data from Africa. Do you understand? They need data from Africa. Without data, they can't just go and give you some numbers and say they are representing the countries that they have data for.
Yeah.
So if they only got data from South Africa, that's what they represent. Do you understand? But you can believe me, we both are in these countries. There are EVs in Kenya, there are EVs in Ghana, there are EVs in Nigeria. So if the GOV represents South Africa, you know definitely that they haven't represented the continent. Is it a big challenge? Yes, it is a challenge. And I think I have spoken about this with the IEA, and they're working very hard on it because it's not just they don't just want to represent a section and not represent another section. But they can't represent you if you don't allow them to represent you. The representation here is the data. We need to be able to give them clean, clear, verifiable data. We need to be able to present this data, and then through that, we are able to, because that document, as you've said, you went to look at it, and other investors will look at it.
Definitely.
That document is key for investment onto the continent. But if the document doesn't represent the continent, how can the document drive investment?
Yeah.
So it's data, and data has been one of the biggest challenges on the continent, not just for vehicles, no, for everything.
Yeah, true.
We just don't keep good data, right? If you don't keep good data, the IEA cannot manufacture data for us. We need to help the IEA to help us to be able to represent the data that we can. Now, on the back of that, because that number is actually not showing it, I don't want to use that to say, based on that, I won't be optimistic. No, I know that the numbers are not showing there just because we haven't presented good data to them. Today, I can tell you that if you go to your Nigerian port or Ghanaian port and try to even pull the data for electric vehicles, they themselves will even be struggling with it. Because I know there are people who lumped every vehicle as one.
Together, yeah.
Right. They didn't say this is a plug-in hybrid, this is a hybrid, they don't even know the cars. They just say, I used to look at some data where I'll say, a Nissan Leaf. You're telling me it's diesel engine vehicle? Like, no, that's not possible. Nissan Leaf, do you know what Nissan Leaf is? But if I didn't know the Nissan Leaf, I wouldn't be doing that.
Sure.
Do you understand? But if all of that data is still being saying that it's internal combustion engine, then we don't have any EVs. That's what it means. I am sure that when people were driving EVs in Ghana, the data showed that there was no a single EV in the country, right? I'm sure of that because we don't keep data. So data is our challenge. And notwithstanding the data, I remain optimistic because what would be the point of optimism if there's not a challenge? Optimism thrives where there's challenge. You can only be optimistic despite a challenge. That's why the word optimism leads. When we are being optimistic about a future, we are not saying there's no challenge there. I think we tend to want to be optimistic when everything is glorious, right? Now, if everything is glorious, then you don't have optimism. You're just extrapolating what is now into the future. So that's not optimism. I don't call it optimism. Optimism is looking into the future, looking at certain trends and being able to see that based on this and that, it could go this way. I'm optimistic because decarbonization is a global agenda. And then that way, it's an African agenda. The energy transition pathways that every country has, somewhere, somehow, as I mentioned in the beginning, we always have energy and transport as part of their mix because these top are emitters. They are top emitters almost in every country. And because those are top emitters, countries are going to come up with innovative ways to be able to tackle those. And in their quest to tackle those, they're going to be solving this problem mostly with electrified transportation. And as we are making electricity generation greener, that is what is going to drive this change. So I'm looking from the broader high level perspective on the continent for this. Then when you zoom into individual countries, you're seeing the overdependence on importation of diesel, petrol, and all of the others for some countries, and how the exchange rates and all of that affects most countries in that importation drive. When you go to Rwanda, for instance, which I've had the pleasure of sitting with my guys in Rwanda, working with them and understanding their whole EV transition system. Rwanda depends a lot on importation of fuel. So basically, they have pushed electric vehicles a lot. That is their agenda. Their agenda is that we want to win ourselves over the dependence on importation. So they move towards, and that is where I'm saying, with these kinds of ideas of how we want to transition, I'm going to see a very big change in the coming years. And now it has become a business opportunity for the private sector. Now, that is my third way. Where the private sector sees a business case for EVs, oh my goodness, it's amazing. When you take one private sector player who can set up a charging station, right? Import EVs, right? And use them as a ride hailing. At the same time, lease to own some. Yet they all come and charge at his charging station. Tell me how that is not a business opportunity. People will always buy the vehicle. Ride hailing will always use Ubers and will always use all the ride hailings. We would also want to buy vehicles, but we don't have all the money, just like we said a few minutes ago. But there are financing mechanisms. The lease to own being one of them, the grid credit lines being one of them. Banks can offer grid credit lines, right? You can call it not green, you can call it green, but they can offer those credit lines for people to do that. Or you can do lease to own. And when you do that, you are killing two birds with one stone. Me as a business person, I'm able to import more vehicles for you. But at the same time, you're able to use my charging station and I generate revenue. And then you can pay me with time. So you see, as the business models keep growing and being refined, what you're going to see is a lot of private sector enter the space. And as government tries to create a conducive atmosphere for them to thrive, it will even be the next big thing when it comes to leapfrogging. But I like to use the story of the mobile phone. And when the mobile phone came, nobody ever thought that our rural areas, everybody will be holding a mobile phone. Nobody ever thought that was possible. We thought for the mobile phone, it wasn't going to penetrate Africa. That's what we thought, basically. But go to the rural areas, everybody's holding a phone. I mean, we don't care if we know what the phone is and what the phone can or can't do. I mean, we don't really care. We just know we're holding an iPhone, we're holding a Samsung, we're holding that, right? Basically. But everybody has a phone. Now that is leapfrogging. Nobody thought it was possible. But the mobile phone era, what it did was this. There was the rural area people who some of them had never gotten a mobile, even a landline, what we call it, the handset, right? The one you have at home. Most people never had that in the rural areas. The handset days were for the rich homes, really, when people have landline at home, what's your home telephone number, really? But you had a group of people in the rural areas who never had the landline, the handset one, and they jumped from that all the way to mobile phone.
To mobile
That
phone.
is the EV revolution. That is what it will mimic. You are having some people who will never even have electricity, but jump all the way to own 2 and 3 wheelers with batteries, swappable batteries that they can use to electrify their homes, and on top of that, use it for business. That is what I'm saying the revolution is going to do now. So if that revolution is taking place in the rural areas, and you are having business cases like this taking place in the urban areas, where private sector people are doing lease to own, grid credit lines, and all of those things for people, tell me how this is not an atmosphere that I can extrapolate. So although my optimism is based on my passion for the industry and my passion for decarbonization and the climate change and growth in this sector, because we have a situation where we have a conundrum of having economic growth, but at the same time, taking into consideration the climate. Right. Africa has that conundrum, right? And I know a lot of people will sing the song that why should we be the ones to pay when we are only emitting 4%, right? Yeah, I get it. Yeah. That song has been sung and we've heard it. But let's go beyond that song. What I want to say is that if there's climate effects, who does it affect most? Who has the resilience capacity to be able to withstand? Is it Africa? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So whilst we are growing economically, but I get it, I hear us, and I know that we have an economic problem. We need to grow economically. And the West, when they were growing economically, did it on coal. They did it a lot, banned it a lot because they were now trying to refine it, right? The learning curve was so low then, so we were just burning, right? Today, we have a better learning curve. So we can say, instead of doing this, we're using gas as a transitionary fuel and using gas rather than using coal. And so there are all those elements that come to place, but we need to be able to economically grow, but at the same time, balance that with our climate objectives. And so when you have a business case like what I just told you about somebody having a charging station, importing vehicles, selling someone lease to own, having ride hailing and all of that, that for me is a business case for private sector that wants to enter the business field.
Mm-hmm.
And some will just own charging stations, streams of charging stations. And that for me, it's what is growth going to look like? It's going to look really good because the private sector, looking at the business opportunity, coupled with their innovation and with a little government support, we could go further.
This is really contagious. I feel the energy from you. The passion it's really, really contagious, and the optimism it's helpful. And I think a lot of us, also our listeners, also see the optimism because, like you also mentioned, there is a lot of counter conversations, right? That's like the song has been sung again and again and again, where the argument is Africa does not emit quite a lot. Why should we leapfrog? Why shouldn't we go through the part of natural gas, then we go through the learning curve gradually? But we should also quite look at the fact that it's also possible to leapfrog, like you mentioned, for the mobile phone case, which nobody saw coming. And I think it's also quite replicable for the EV sector. It's not just been a learning curve for the listeners, it has also been a learning curve for me, because interestingly, I'm also within the EV space. I'm doing a research on advanced batteries for electric vehicles. And so I've also quite learned a lot from this report, from this podcast. So thank you very much, Doris, for laying it all out. I could see that your heart was out. You didn't hold anything back. And that is that is really amazing to see. So thank you very much. We appreciate being on the podcast.
You're welcome. And I'm happy that we're able to have such conversations and hold space for diverse views. I think that for me is intellectualism, being able to hold space for everybody's view, because everybody's view is grounded on a certain level of insights that they have of an issue. So holding space for diverse views has been where I believe we thrive the most. And if Africans, we could make that a space to talk about, it would be great. I mean, I think I like that you are doing battery section, and maybe that would be a conversation to talk about another day, because in doing the study I said on sustainability, I did a lot of questioning on the battery end of life use of batteries, and what plans people are having, and how people are going about it, and their projections into the future. And that even gives you a little context on where this is going to lead and how it's going to lead. But it comes from the mouth of these CEOs, because I interviewed only the CEOs basically, and it comes directly from their own mouths and their strategic visions and where they want to go. So it'll be great sometime. I'll share that, but I believe that we can always hold space for diverse views. As much as I work with the Agence Française now, I don't believe I'm speaking on the behalf of the Agence Française. I'm speaking as an expert, and having been in the field and continue to be in the field. I'll continue to be here for as long as possible, because it's my passion. And so I'm speaking from that perspective, and my optimism is driven on my desire for Africa to just see where it wants to go. And, I've schooled a lot in the UK and done all my schooling abroad, but we still there's the passion for this continent to come back to just make it thrive however way we can. And I don't see how we can do that if we don't have an ounce of optimism.
True.
Without that, without hope, what do we live for, basically?
True. Yeah, true.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and I wish you the best on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's highly appreciated. To all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the podcast. We hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you.